Boone Carter stood in the grit and glare outside the trading post, holding a photograph like a plank. The picture showed a slim, pale girl with soft brown curls and downcast eyes, hands folded like a hymn. 6 months of letters had carved a space in his mind where a life might fit. The wagon lurched in on a heat-hazed afternoon, wheels complaining, dust turning the horizon to a veil. The door swung wide. A woman stepped down, steady, deliberate, claiming the ground beneath her boots. Her skin was deep brown, luminous against the hard sky. Her body was generous and strong. Her hair was darker than the photo's curls and pulled back tight. Her eyes were not averted. They were green and direct. "You must be Boone Carter," she said, voice low and sure. She did not wait for him to nod. "I'm Ruby, not Violet. Ruby." Boone felt the boards under his boots tilt. The letters flashed through him, wildflowers, rosewater, a shy future promised. She was not shy. She did not fold. "Where's Violet?" he asked, the words rough in his mouth. Ruby's jaw tightened, a small shift like a weather change. "There's been a change of plans." She reached into the wagon and drew out a leather satchel, slinging it over one shoulder. "We need to talk." The driver had already turned away, tending his team with theatrical focus. That alone told Boone something larger than misunderstanding had arrived with the wagon. "The letters," he said, 6 months of them. "Things happened between the ink and the road, things you should hear from me." She stepped closer, and the world narrowed to breath and dust motes. She smelled of honest labor and sage from the flats. The photograph in Boone's hand suddenly felt like a child's drawing held up against a storm. "Where is she, Ruby?" The rancher's authority settled into his voice, the tone that set crews moving and gates swinging on time. "That depends on how much truth you can take," she said, meeting his gaze. "Once I start, we cannot go back to the life you thought you ordered." Around them the trading post murmured. Boone weighed the porch, the eyes, the gossip that would ripple out if they peeled back their lives in public. "Not here," she said, scanning faces. "Too many ears." The word home rose in him and met a wall. He had painted shutters in hopeful green. He had planted wildflowers by the steps. Inviting Ruby, this black, fat woman who had just named herself and the change, felt like stepping into a future he had not ordered and could not stop. "Follow me," he said. She climbed onto the wagon bench with a practiced swing, and when she settled beside him, the boards dipped, the air shifted. The road to his valley unspooled quiet and tense. Once, when the trail curved and the sun flared, he caught her looking at him. She did not look away. His house waited in its tuck of hills, modest, square, with a porch built wide to catch the evening wind. He had made it ready for Violet, the curtains, the quilt, the table set for two. Now Ruby's eyes swept it all. He felt suddenly like a boy who had swept a dirt floor and called it a ballroom. "You built this?" she asked. "Most of it," he said, dropping to the ground. He offered his hand. She hesitated, then put her palm in his, warm, calloused, certain. When she stepped down, she stood nearer than politeness called for, and he did not move. "It's beautiful," she said, and he heard that she meant the work, not the fantasy. They stood there, the touch between them too much and just enough. Ruby withdrew first, color rising along her throat. He cleared his voice. "Inside," he managed. She paused at the threshold and turned, the light catching gold in those green eyes. "Before we cross, know this. After today, you will see me differently. You will see everything differently." "Maybe that's the point," Boone said. She measured him one last time, then nodded. Together, they stepped into the house.
Inside the ranch house, late light pooled like honey across the plank floor, gilding the hand-carved chairs and the simple table set for two. The curtains he had chosen for a stranger's softness stirred in the breeze, and the fireless hearth held its breath. Ruby stood just within the doorway, her broad shoulders squared, the brown dress dusted pale at the hem from the road. She took in everything: Boone's careful order, the polished tin cups, the vase of wildflowers, and the look on her face said she recognized work when she saw it. Recognition did not soften the task in front of her. "You planned this life down to the spoons," she said, voice even. "I planned for a woman who existed on paper," Boone answered. His hat hung from his fingers like a confession. Paper never has to eat, or sleep, or speak. Ruby moved to the table and trailed a thumb along the rim of a plate. Her hands were big and competent, the knuckles nicked, the nails kept short. "Then let the living speak," she said. He gestured to a chair, but she remained standing. The refusal was gentle and unarguable. He stayed standing too, understanding the chairs would come later, if they came at all. Outside a horse stamped. The house answered with a small creak in its joists, the wood keen to settle around truth. "Violet never wanted to marry you," Ruby said, no preface. She laid the sentence down like a plank across a gap. "Not from the start." The blow landed. Boone did not flinch. A man who breaks horses learns the cost of a flinch. "Then why the letters?" he asked. "Why the photograph, the promises?" "Because winter took our father and left us with notes due and men knocking," Ruby said. "Because we were two women with a farm that ate money faster than it grew it. Because I can write a clear hand and make a future sound like a road instead of a cliff." She met his eyes. "I wrote the letters. Violet signed her name. The mind that talked to you about the books and the spring rain and hanging laundry that smells like sun was mine." The photograph in his pocket felt suddenly heavier, as if paper could carry bricks. He set his hat on the peg by the door, the motion slow, deliberate. "You spoke plain," he said at last. "I liked the mind in those pages. I liked it very much." A flicker, something like relief, touched Ruby's mouth and was gone. 3 days ago, a man came to the boarding house, Marcus Dalton, tall, dressed fine, gray at the temples but young in the eyes. The eyes are the only true part. They are cruel. He told Violet you were already married, that you collect wives by letter and sell them to hard camps. He brought papers and photographs, enough to frighten the 17-year-old who has not yet learned how far a lie can travel. Boone's jaw tightened. The name excavated old heat. Ledgers cooked, wagons stripped. Boone left to scrub his reputation clean with a handful of witnesses and bad timing. "I knew him," he said. "He knows how to make falsehood put on a good coat." "He knows more than he should," Ruby said. She crossed to the window and looked out at the valley, a green bowl quieting under dusk. She turned back. "He knows about your money, your plans to move into cattle trading, the contracts you are courting." Boone's eyes traveled the room, as if treachery could be spotted by the shine it left. Then he set that thought aside with a practiced shake of the head. "Where is Violet now?" Ruby's hands flattened on the windowsill. Her voice, always steady, thinned at the edges. "She left with him," she said, "but not because she believed him." She chose her next words carefully. "He took our brother, Thomas, 14. Dalton sent word, 'Do as I say, or the boy vanishes into the same place as all the missing men no one admits to counting.'" Silence sat down between them. In that silence, the house changed shape. It was no longer a stage set for a tidy future. It became a strong box, a fort, a place that could hold people while bad weather passed. "Why come to me?" Boone asked, although he already knew. The question measured the size of the courage in front of him. "Because you aren't what he said," she replied simply. "Because I read you in the lines of your letters you didn't mean to write, the pauses, the erasures, the way you never pretended that land is anything but work." She drew a small leather journal from the pocket sewn into her skirt. She recognized the book for what it was before she opened it, a chart through other people's lies. Ruby read dates and rooms from a hotel he knew too well. The Silver Dollar, second floor, door with a sticky latch. Sheriff Morrison's name appeared and appeared again, nested beside Dalton's. Conversations about Boone's contracts, about letters, about leverage. Boone's breath went thin. The sheriff had helped him stake this place, had loaned him hands when fences needed stretching. Old favors soured in his mouth. "I was a fool," he said. "You were busy building and thought friendship was a lock you didn't have to check. That's not foolish, it's human." On cue, as if the valley wanted its own say, hoofbeats rolled up the slope. 3 horses, steady as a verdict. Ruby and Boone stepped onto the porch together. The lead horse carried Sheriff Morrison. The 2 behind kept their seats too straight. One coat fell open over a federal badge. Morrison hailed, voice official flat. "Evenin', Boone. Need a word." "He brought a paper," Ruby murmured. The sheriff read the charges like a man listing fence posts. Fraud, theft, conspiracy to kidnap, each syllable hammered to the porch boards. Boone's name followed each count like a shadow. "Complaint by Marcus Dalton," Morrison said. Ruby stepped forward, full height, presence unmissable. "I am Violet's sister," she announced. "She is not missing. She was taken." Morrison's mouth thinned. He gestured with the warrant. The federal man watched, eyes patient and weighing. The evening turned taut. "Sheriff," Ruby said, and now her voice carried the iron Boone had heard in his own minutes before. "You should hear my evidence before you disgrace yourself further." Morrison's hand twitched toward his holster. Boone saw the flick, the choice, the years of easy power balancing on a fingertip. He opened his mouth to warn. The shot cracked. Glass blew from the window behind them in a bright, vicious spray. Ruby moved first. She hauled Boone sideways and down, the porch biting his shoulder, splinters in his palm. In that same motion, she shoved a small cold key into his hand. She said, "The barn," breath quick, eyes hot. The federal marshal was already off his horse, shouting orders. Morrison was on the ground in a tangle of limbs and authority. The third rider fought a skittish mount. The world had erupted, and within that eruption, Ruby and Boone slid into shadow, 2 shapes heading for the only door that would open the path ahead.
The barn took the dusk like a secret, swallowing color until only shapes remained, rafters like ribs, stalls like pews. Boone slid the door enough to enter, Ruby close behind. Hay and leather rose to meet them. Outside, the marshal's orders ricocheted off the house. Inside, the world narrowed to what they could carry. Ruby tapped the lantern. Boone struck a match. The flare gilded her face before the wick steadied. She moved like someone who had mapped this room, past the tack wall and labeled feed bins to a cedar trunk braced against the studs. "The key," she whispered. He pressed the small iron into her palm and watched her fit it where he'd never noticed a lock, a hole disguised by a knot in the wood. The turn was soft, the lid lifted. Folded blankets, then a wooden box with a simple hasp. Ruby opened it. Letters, stacked and ribboned, breathed ink and cologne. Different hands, different towns, all addressed to Marcus Dalton. Under the letters, photographs. Boone saw bruises first, round, ugly blooms on faces and arms, tear tracks silvered by the developer's hand. Bile rose in his throat. "These are the real ones," Ruby said, voice steady. "What he uses to bend people." Boone read the names on envelopes. Sheriff Eli Morrison, repeated. A territorial judge from the ballots. The Railtown mayor. A cattle buyer rumored to pray with one hand and cheat with the other. Each letter detailed favors, expedited claims, vanished fines, quiet threats. Each signature tied another man to rot. "Violet found this stash," Ruby said. "She went to his hotel room to confront him, saw what he is." "Then why leave with him?" Boone asked, though the answer already formed. "Because he took Thomas, 14. He sent word that if Violet didn't do as told, the boy would vanish into the places no one counts. Her jaw shook once and set. I would have burned a county down. She bargained for time. "Where?" he asked. "Miller's Canyon," Ruby answered, lifting a folded tage. Violet's cramped hand, precise even under fear. 20 miles north, a cabin past the line where local law pretends the map ends. It fit. Isolation and the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. As if summoned, the door eased open. Marshal Chen stepped in, lantern light cutting his face. He took in trunk, box, photographs. He didn't curse. The tightening of his mouth was sentence enough. "Mr. Carter, Miss Ruby, is that what I think it is? It's the spine of a snake, and a map to where it sheds." Chen scanned, jaw ticking. Judges, a sheriff, railroad men. His eyes lifted. "This clears you and damns a crowd. If Dalton's holding a boy, we move before he hears what's breaking." "I ride." "So do I," Ruby said. Chen studied her a heartbeat. She met the look without blinking, broad and rooted as an oak. "Do you know his habits? Where he keeps people, how he counts meals, the way he circles doors before he sleeps. Violet will trust me faster than a badge." Chen nodded. "First light. Morrison will sing until then." He tucked letters inside his coat, paused over the photographs. "We handle these like live rounds. Men with this much to lose bite." When he left, the barn breathed again. Boone closed the box and took Ruby's hand, an instinct surprising and sure. Her fingers were warm, nicked, real. "What you did, keeping records, keeping steady. What we're doing," she corrected. "No one walks out of a storm alone." They doused the lantern. Beyond the door, night smelled of sage. They crossed the yard, the house ahead a square of lamplight and broken glass. At the threshold, Boone hesitated, knowing the line they stepped over wasn't wood, but fate. "After we bring them home," he said, promise low, "know this, what's growing here is real." Ruby's laugh was fierce. "Then let's live long enough to carry it." They went inside to gather water and ammunition. The barn kept its secret, waiting for morning to pull the first thread from the rest of their lives.
Dawn thinned the night to ash as they reined in above Miller's Canyon, the world below arranged like a dark geometry of crime. Sheer rock walls shouldered close around a pocket of cottonwoods and dust. A main cabin hunched beside 2 outbuildings, and a corral held 4 horses blinking at the gray. Smoke unwound from a stovepipe, a quiet lie about domesticity. Boone crouched behind a ledge with Marshal Chen and the second rider, glassing the yard. Ruby lay belly down a few yards to their left, steady as a rock shelf, watching the smallest shack with barred windows. 2 on the porch, Chen murmured. 1 by the corral. 4th is inside or sleeping with his boots on. Hostages in that shed, Ruby said, chin angling toward the bars. Dalton keeps them close enough to hear the cooking, far enough to smell their fear. Boone took the measure of the approach, scree that would skitter under a careless boot, a gully that could swallow a man to his ribs if he didn't know where the bedrock shouldered up. The canyon breathed cold against his teeth. He tasted iron and dust and the memory of promises. "On my mark," Chen said. "Carter, right side. I take the porch. Miss Ruby, you move for the barred door with that key. We stay quiet until the first 2 drop." Ruby nodded once. Her face held no waver. She checked the pistol Boone had given her and slid it back into the holster against her skirt like she had been wearing iron all her life. Chen's hand sliced the air. Boone's first shot took the nearest board guard clean before the man could turn his head. Chen's rifle stamped the second into the boards, the thud swallowed by canyon stone. At the corral, the horse handler jerked, saw bodies, and bolted for the main cabin yelling. Boone was already moving, skidding down a cut of loose rock, boots searching for purchase, the world narrowing to breath, distance, sound. Ruby broke left in a low run, a taut line of motion. She crossed the yard like a woman who understood where a body could fit between bullets and sight lines. At the barred shack, the key slid into the lock as if it had been waiting its whole short life to do exactly this. The hinge gave a tired groan. Inside, a smell hit her. Stale sweat, fear, a crust of old stew. Violet lifted her head from a pallet, eyes huge and shining. Thomas stood too quickly, wobbling, and then steadied with a jaw set like Boone's on a hard day. "Quiet," Ruby said, cutting their bonds. "We're here. We're leaving." "Dalton said he killed you," Violet breathed, a sound more sob than speech. "He lies as easy as breathing," Ruby said, pushing them behind her toward the door. From the main cabin, a rifle barked. Splinters leapt off the porch beam near Boone's shoulder. He flattened, rolled, and came up firing, driving the shooter back from the doorway. Chen ghosted left, put a round through the window, then another when a muzzle flashed back. Inside, a man hollered and went silent. Ruby guided Violet and Thomas to the threshold and froze. Dalton barreled across the yard, half-buttoned shirt flapping, eyes bright with a cruel light. He moved fast for a man with vanity in his boots, rifle shouldered already. He saw Ruby, saw the siblings bracketed by her body, and smiled like a knife. "You ruined good plans," he said, breathless and delighted. "Big one, step aside." Ruby didn't step. She drew and fired twice, a center mass lesson from a teacher who didn't waste chalk. Dalton staggered, shock opening his face into a question he had never asked himself. He clutched at the doorway and kept coming, stubborn in the way bad men are stubborn when they think the world is an instrument made for their songs. "Still not over," he rasped, lifting the rifle again. "It is for you," Ruby said, calm as a bell, and put a third shot where the first two had written the address. He went down hard, the rifle banging the threshold with a wooden complaint, and then lying still. Out by the main cabin, the last of Dalton's men threw his gun when Chen appeared in the doorway with his barrel leveled and his voice flat with federal authority. Boone sprinted the last yards to the barred shack and stopped only when he could see with his hands. Violet alive, cheeks wet, Thomas shaky, angry, breathing. Then he looked at Ruby. She stood squared, chest heaving, pistol still steady, and he felt something in his chest expand to fit the fact of her. "It's over," she said, as if naming it could make it stay true. "For now," Chen answered, arriving with his hat knocked back and his eyes already scanning the ridgelines. "We bind the wounded and ride. There's a doctor set to meet us on the flats." He crouched by Dalton, checked for anything left, and found nothing. The marshal's mouth tightened, but he didn't waste words on the dead. Boone took Thomas's hands and wrapped them around a tin cup he'd found near a barrel, helping him drink until some color came back. "You did right holding on," he said. The boy nodded once, as if acknowledging a brand laid true at last. Ruby tucked Violet under her arm the way she would guard a flame on a windy night. "Can you walk?" she asked. "I can now," Violet said, voice small but fierce, the girl from the letters and also not. Realer, heavier with what she had seen. They moved fast, sorting what mattered from what could burn. The second rider tied the surviving man's hands and strung him to a saddle. Chen took the letters Ruby had hidden beneath her bodice, the worst of the evidence, a handful kept close, and slid them inside his coat as if tucking away a live coal. Boone retrieved the dropped key and gave it back to Ruby without comment, as if returning a tool to its rightful craftsman. When they climbed out of the canyon, the sun at last cleared the eastern wall and poured down over their backs. The light made long shadows that looked like tomorrow. Behind them, Miller's Canyon hunched back into itself, a wound that would scar but not fester. Ahead, the trail unspooled toward water and a waiting doctor, and a town that would have to change its stories. Ruby rode with Violet behind her, and Thomas just abreast of Boone. And the air tasted less of iron, more of sage, as if the land itself had exhaled.
6 months later, the ranch wore a new season, the way a strong back carries a full day's work. Without complaint, with quiet pride. Morning light combed the pasture, found the fence lines truer than before, and spilled across the kitchen where coffee steamed and bread cooled on a rack Ruby had insisted Boone build to proper height. The bullet-shattered window had long since been replaced, the frame planed smooth. When wind moved across the porch, it rattled only the chimes Thomas fashioned from spent brass and horseshoe nails. Ruby moved through the house with the steadiness of weather. Her body, broad, brown, and beautifully sure of itself, wore a blue work dress and an apron dusted with flour. One hand cupped the gentle curve of her belly, as if reminding the day it had more than one life to tend. She paused in the doorway to watch Thomas jog the bay gelding along the fence, posture already showing a horseman's patience. He had gained 2 inches and a new laugh, the kind that came up easy, unstartled, a sound no longer braced against doors that might burst open. The town had changed outer garments too. Morrison had been carried to court in chains. Marcus Dalton's letters made a parade of names no one imagined would tip their hats to judgment. One judge resigned in a spray of careful words. A mayor lost an election he'd expected to win in his sleep. And the railroad men began to knock before they measured. With the bribes burned out of the line, the survey bent south and east. The rails sang through the distant draw instead of cutting Boone's pasture in two. The whistle could be heard on clear nights, more memory than menace. Violet had married a schoolteacher who owned 3 shirts and a gentle stubbornness. Their tiny house near the church filled with the smell of lamp oil and proofing bread. A cradle waited, draped in a quilt Ruby and Violet made together from old dresses and wagon cloth. When Violet walked the lane toward the ranch, her steps were brisk, unafraid. She had the look of someone who had decided to keep all the days ahead. Boone came up from the spring house with a crock of butter in each hand. He set them on the kitchen table, glanced at Ruby, and smiled like a man who still surprised himself by winning something he had not known how to ask for. He had never grown used to the way she occupied space, confident, rooted, unshrunk. In town, a few mouths had gaped at first, puzzled that the rancher's bride was not the slip of a photograph, but a black, fat woman who met eyes square and made numbers behave. The mouths closed quickly. The herd had fattened, the fences held, and the storm-scoured gullies had been terraced under Ruby's direction. Results always did better than gossip. He reached for her hand, wide and capable. "Field looks good," he said. "Field looks honest," she answered. "Honest land pays back." They ate at the small table by the window, stew thick with last summer's tomatoes, bread with butter that took the knife like a secret taking breath. Afterward, Boone washed while Ruby dried, and their talk tracked ordinary things that had once felt like luxuries. A neighbor's heifer dropping a calf backward and standing for the help. The preacher's new habit of visiting without asking for money. The problem of woodpeckers in the cottonwood by the creek. Ordinary stitched a life better than any spectacle. In the yard, Thomas whooped and the gelding tossed his head. Boone stepped outside to watch a moment, pride shading his features. Ruby followed, wiping her hands on her apron, savoring the bite in the air that said winter was not so far she could be careless. She leaned into the porch post, one palm absently circling her belly as if winding a clock. The child turned once, a polite knock from within. Boone set an arm around Ruby's shoulders, the gesture unshowy and exactly right. "Sometimes he thinks about the day at the trading post," he said, meaning himself but speaking the way 2 people speak when the past is a shared barn, swept out and put to use. What he believed he was getting. She caught his slight shift and let a small smile rise. "A photograph and a promise. A photograph and a lie," he corrected, the word gentle, not bitter. "And a correction the size of a life." Ruby bumped his hip with hers. "He ordered a bride," she said, voice amused and warm, "and a black, fat woman stepped off the wagon instead." The ranch learned to be glad for that mistake. "The ranch were," he said, and his eyes were soft on her profile, "and the man." A wagon rattled on the road, the teachers slow with care. Violet climbed down, a hand pressed to the small of her back, and called greeting. They gathered on the porch, traded baskets, eggs for books, collards for a jar of preserves. Violet rested, laughed, told a story about a student who insisted the state line could be jumped if one had a long enough stride. When she left, she hugged Ruby long, and the two women stood holding each other with the knowledge of what had been survived and what could still be made. Evening folded itself over the hills. Boone lit the lamp and set it near the window. The glass threw their reflections back at them. His broad shoulders, Ruby's fuller silhouette, the curve of possibility between them. Thomas came in with dust on his knees and stories queued behind his teeth. They ate again, smaller plates, and then the house settled the way a good animal does, shifting once, sighing, finding comfort. On the porch, under a vault of stars coming on, one by one, Ruby and Boone stood in companionable silence. Somewhere far off, the train gave a thin cry, not a threat, but a note in the chord of the valley. Coyotes tuned themselves beyond the creek. The garden, dark and orderly, held the day's heat like a kept promise. Ruby looked out over the land that had tested and taken them in. She thought of the wrong sister stepping off a wagon, of a barn hiding a box, of a canyon that had tried to be a grave and failed. She thought of the child turning inside her, of Thomas's easy laugh, of Violet's quick, brave smile. She thought of Boone, who had shifted from orders to listening, from plans to presence. He slid his fingers through hers, and together they watched the night gather itself. Life, it turned out, was not what had been ordered by mail. It was this: two people standing steady on a porch they had repaired, holding hands without urgency, ready for whatever came down the road.